Well, I put these slides together this morning, so we're gonna see what breaks. But I'm really excited to get to share this with y'all. This event in particular feels like the thing that has been wanting to happen. And so finally we have all the people in the room, and I can't believe the esteemed people we get to be with. So thank you. I am part of the Network Goods Institute, and we're really interested in two main categories of problems in the world. The first is, how do we price externalities and fund public goods? The second is, how do we do collective intelligence? How do we aggregate beliefs and opinions and do information search? And so on Monday or Tuesday, talked about a mechanism set called the negation game, which was exactly for that. And now that I know that Robin Hanson is in the audience, that is what I should be talking about. And so of course, that is not what I'm going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about index wallets, which is a mechanism for, which is potentially a mechanism or an interesting component in a public goods funding process. So public goods funding can be thought of as a kind of governance question. You're trying to elicit all of the preferences of people that are in a community, and like the preference that their computer stays online. There's probably an option to prevent that.
It's back.
The option is wiggle the mouse. And so if you can find like ways to, one of the big questions would be, can we find ways to get all of the preferences of a group of people and like evince them or cause them to rise up, like bottom up, so that then we can fund public goods with that. Right now we take the other approach. We have governments and organizations that top down make decisions about how we should fund things. And so index wallets are going to be an experiment, are an experimental mechanism in doing just that. I'm going to start with this great quote from Jim Barksdale, which is, "I know of only two ways to make money, bundling and unbundling." Who knows this quote from Jim? Obviously what he's talking about, maybe this isn't obvious. What he's talking about is that there's an era of like CDs, where you would buy a CD and would have a whole bunch of songs on it. And then along comes Apple, and Apple says, okay, we're just going to sell each of these tracks individually for $1.99. And Jim Barksdale says this is a classic example of when you unbundle something, you're able to make some money off of that. People buy individual songs. And the rebundling happens right afterwards. So Spotify comes along, bundles all of these things up, and then now you're buying the subscription to all of music, right? So you're buying the category called music instead of the individual song. Except if it's Apple, they'll also force you to download U2 on your phone. So like just by being on the platform, there's some bundling, right? But it's kind of fun to also think about, what if we took this literally? What if we totally misinterpret Jim Barksdale and say, he's actually talking about how to make money, like a currency. And so what would happen if, like right now we have unbundled currencies. What would happen if we bundle currencies? And so that's what we'll play with index wallets. So here's how a traditional payment works. Who here has ever bought something? No, just kidding. In a traditional payment, there's a vendor and there's a price, and you transfer some amount of the currency that they prefer to be paid in. If you don't have that currency, maybe you go onto a foreign exchange market and you buy some of that currency, and they get the currency in their preferred denomination. And if you're in the United States, you pay in USD, and if you're in Europe, you pay with the euro, right? In index wallets, we're doing this differently. Now there's two pieces of information that the vendor is providing you. The first is the price, just like before, but the second is a set of valuations which are publicly visible as to how much they value every single currency in this wallet. And these valuations are special to the vendor. They get to decide whatever they want for this. In principle, they can put them anywhere. And based on what those valuations are, the amount of your wallet that you're going to have to transfer will change. So you're always going to be paying with an equal fraction of your wallet. And once the money is bundled into these index payments, it can never be unbundled, right? So there's no way to, if you put some euro into this bundle, the euros are constantly in there. If there's some USDC in this, they're constantly in there. You can't sell that individually again. You can only sell it, the entire bundle. And you can imagine, that those of you who think about smart contracts are already imagining how you might implement a structure like this, something we can do on-chain. And so now when the transaction completes, that full slice of your wallet is being transferred, and the person is happy. But they didn't get a choice. Notice they did not get a choice of what currency they were paid in, because you showed up and you just paid with all the currencies that you had in your wallet. So it's important at this point to make sure that has been grokked. So are there any questions, just to clarify, make sure? It's a very simple mechanism, but it's a different way of thinking about money. You're now paying with many different currencies at once. Anything unclear? I've made amazing graphics this time and said all the things I intended to say, so there shouldn't be any questions. So this is incredibly simple to state. This is what it looks like in code. And actually, if you peer at this code for a second, you can see that down here at the bottom, the cost, this is a hint of what's to come. Yeah, spoilers are good. They actually make people appreciate stories better. The hint of what's to come is that the output, it's actually cheaper to buy from a vendor who has similar values to you, similar valuations to you, than to buy from a vendor that has different ones, that has divergent ones. Okay, and this raises the question, what happens if the vendor changes their valuation? So this vendor has a different valuation than before. You're still paying in a fraction of these currencies. You're just paying in, the exact, the slice has just slightly changed. Okay. Okay, so that is index wallets. That's the complete mechanism. But there's this obvious question to answer, which is why? Why does this matter? Is this good for anything? Well, it turns out that a lot of people have already played with this idea. So Michael Nielsen, if you're familiar with him, Juan Benet, another person whose name started with a V, who I can now no longer find their blog post. Lots of people are thinking about, and they call this idea of the right, like a currency that can encode additional things by many different names: colored coins, matrix money, vector money, scale-free money. The vector money is kind of a fun way to think about this. We live in a world today where we pay with scalar money, just currencies. We now have this ability to pay. We have seen the power of we have this ability to encode money as vectors. We couldn't do that before. And so what happens if we play with this new primitive? And what I want to tell is a little bit of a story of maybe why this could be interesting. So we live in the land of price and cost. There's a vendor of some sort who has some cost for the goods that they sell, and they have some price that they can sell it at. And the difference between those two, your screen is over here, the difference between those two is the green in between, right? But as we know, the total benefit created by your product and the total harm that might be created by your product are not always captured in that currency, right? Not always captured in that transaction. And these we call externalities. Positive externalities on the one hand and negative externalities on the other. And so these have a long list, which many of you could talk about. Parks and trails are difficult to fund. Transport is potentially difficult to fund, like all of these public goods that we all benefit from, but that aren't exactly encoded in the transactions that we partake in. And so the question is there potentially a way to bundle those up directly into the money that we transact with? And so that's the game that we're going to talk about here. Now we're going to imagine this is a customer who has some set of currencies inside of their wallet, and each of those currencies represent a handful of different public goods. And when they transact with different vendors, those different vendors have different valuations that they've set, and it's going to feel cheaper now for that customer to purchase from somebody who values the same things that they value instead of somebody who doesn't. And so they might prefer to purchase from them. And so on, when one of these vendors then goes to transact with somebody else, the process repeats, right? And so you can imagine, if we're here in Healdsburg and we all show up, then those people who also value the same things that we are, maybe maybe we show up and we have some value that we set for the park or the party that they put on every Tuesday, then that's the sort of thing that local vendors might be more likely to have a stable valuation for. We might be more likely then to go to them if we have some of that currency in our wallet. You can imagine some of these currencies could be like edge currency. So maybe they do the reverse with us, and they have some edge that's in their wallet, or they have some edge that they've set a valuation for. We have some edge that's in our wallet because we're all part of this like roving band of network state participants. We show up somewhere. They're willing to increase their valuation of our currency. We're willing to increase our valuation of their currency. And so there's like this little exchange. And this might be interesting for the funding of public goods. So here's why it might be interesting for the funding of public goods. We can imagine that there's a public goods entrepreneur and they're going to build like a trail somewhere. And they've minted a certain amount of a currency, in this case the green currency, that they're going to offer to other participants in exchange for donations. So in the same way today that we like sell NFTs, and those NFTs are a piece of art, and in exchange for a donation, a person gets back a little bit of this currency. We can imagine people doing the same thing, but now for this currency that's representative of a public good. And then they're going to have an additional amount of this currency that's in their wallet, and all of the vendors that are in their local community are going to look at that, and they're going to say, oh, interesting, this is a little bit of a marketing opportunity. If I increase my valuation of this currency, of this green currency, then it's going to feel cheaper for these people who value the public goods to buy from me. And maybe these vendors are maybe one of these is a bike shop that is like a national chain. So this is Bicycle Village. And maybe this is a local bike shop. And so the local bike shop, because they have more transactional velocity with their local economy, they're able to value this more because more of their employees are cyclists on this trail that are going to benefit from it. And so they're also willing to be paid in and value this currency. Whereas, because so much of the money from the Bicycle Village establishment is going out to New York or wherever the Bicycle Village headquarters are, they're not as able or as willing to increase their valuation for the trail token. And so we've created this little bit of a competitive dynamic where there's like this propinquity, this economic propinquity or sovereignty that we're giving to people who are part of this like local economy.
Could you just tell the actual formula for the transfers? Like I have a wallet with a certain vector and you have a wallet with a vector and I want to buy something from you. What's the conversion formula?
Yep, it's just the dot product between your valuation and the quantity of currencies that you have. So if you're the customer and I'm the vendor, I have some valuation, you have some set of currencies. Take the dot product of those, and then the price is my price divided by whatever that proportion is. Does that make sense? The proportion transferred is my price divided by whatever the wallet value is.
Why should I trade at that price? Why not trade at some other price? Why is that the actual supply and demand equilibrium price I would trade at? Couldn't I do better, for example, picking out of my wallet the things that you want and giving them just the thing that you have the highest value for or something?
Yes, these are great arguments. This is, I think, the next slide. Would you mind if I hit 2 more slides and then we go to the critiques, because there's lots of great critiques. Okay, so everybody's happy here except for the person that didn't get any customers. And now it seems like we have this way in which we've allowed people to encode in this kind of like this network fashion the benefits that they get and the harms directly into the currencies, instead of maybe an external way where we are taxing people additionally or providing some sort of subsidy. So, does it work? We got a grant of $100K from Blue Yard, and that's exactly the question that we're trying to answer. The kinds of questions that we want to answer is, do index wallets actually enable higher donations? Do people still transact with one another, right? will they say that this isn't a fair valuation? And then can real humans actually deal with the complexity of this many different currencies whose valuations they need to keep track of? And if you'd like to follow along with the progress that we're making and sort of our goals in this process, you can go to this website here. It's going to take me, I'm going to jump to answer your question real quick, Robin. So your question is this valuation that people get, is this valuation that people set like the proper one? And why wouldn't they pick a different one? Right.
Do I do different things to get a better deal?
That's right. So what you can imagine is that the vast majority of the currencies that I have set a valuation for are probably going to be the ones, are going to be the market provided ones. The only ones that are likely to have some sort of divergence are the ones that are very local and are thinly traded. And so that would be like, this is an additional source of information or of sync for currencies, is if somebody has a positive valuation for these things in some locale. How well does that answer your question?
I'm still listening.
That's the end of the sentence.
It sounds like you're saying, I'm just going to pay extra for this over the market price because I feel like it's a local fun thing.
This could be part of it, yeah. So some people can have preferences for that. And we know that community currencies are capable of gaining some level of adoption. The only way that we think that this would be stable is if a community had already like locked into this somehow. So they'd already set some valuation for this thing. And the process by which they would have done that is not automatic. So in the results that we have found so far, the price discovery doesn't happen automatically. Instead, there would have to be some coordination process on top of the normal process of discovering our price. Go ahead.
So understanding how well aligned my wallet or values are with, two merchants seems very tough to express in terms of a cognitive load of like, I'm making this evaluation of, am I going to get a better deal at the national versus local shop? Likewise, you've raised your valuation of green currency, what that actually does to my transaction discount versus, today you have you get 10% off because you're biking or whatever. Mm-hmm. That is a thing that you can put on a sign. We've raised our green currency portfolio by 25%. Seems like a harder thing for people to make a decision of how does this impact my price or my cost.
Yeah, this is a good question. The question of how do people, is it actually possible for humans to relate to this dynamic is a really big open one. So let me tell you about how we're approaching finding out that this doesn't work. Because if we can spend 50K to find out that this is totally not viable at all, that's much better than going and building something for $3 million and then having a protocol that never gets used, which has never happened in our space. So it doesn't need to get said. So the approaches to finding out that this doesn't work is some theoretical modeling, some in silico simulations, and then some games and experiments. And we're going to look at a couple of those today. And I get to work with some amazing people on this, all with varying levels of credence that this works. So Ralph Kaufman, for example, will spend many hours a day sending me messages with various kinds of arguments that this is not going to work at all, and here are all the reasons why, and has made some lovely contributions to that, and I'll show you what he said. And so, like more or less, what we're saying is that can we come up with a mathematical model that says that this is actually able to fund public goods above sort of like the traditional way of doing so? Is one question to answer. And we do find that there are regimes where the if there's a benefit for a public good that's shared between both a vendor and a customer, then there is a way for this to automatically find an equilibrium for a valuation that's above zero. And so that might mean that there is if there's a trail and both the store and the customers benefit from that trail, then together they can kind of move their valuation together. It does seem like it tends to benefit the vendor more than it benefits the customer. So the vendor ends up being the one that kind of drives the valuations here. Some other work, though, argues that this isn't the case. So if you have a market that just has a customer and a vendor, then and doesn't go any deeper, so there's no like circulation of the currency, then this doesn't work at all. Valuations stay at zero, donations stay at zero, funding for the public good stays at zero. But this isn't like a complete answer, because we know that if you could never spend the currency that you got, then you would also never have any interest in receiving it, right? And so we kind of proved rigorously that if money doesn't have any value, then people won't want it. But then Roth takes this a step further, and he argues that even if you take into account the circulation of currency, that rational players will devalue the currencies until markets no longer clear. And actually, I just got his results on Tuesday, so I haven't even gotten to dig in yet. So you know as much about his answers as I do. You have your hand raised.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, there we go. I'm curious how, like, even like you mentioned that like it'll go to equilibrium for like larger currencies, but even like those like that are thinly traded, like how can like one prevent like some sort of like arbitrage attack if like I value something just more than that and they're just infinitely trading one way to the valuation literally goes like zero?
Yep.
Like how do you prevent that if there's fundamentally different valuations and it's not automatic?
It's a good question. You don't prevent it. You permit it. You permit arbitrage just like you normally would.
Okay.
And it might actually be valuable to have some arbitrage. So if you imagine two communities, like the story normally goes, two communities, one is downriver, one is upriver. You can imagine that actually let's say that there's some positive externality flowing from the upriver one to the downriver one. You can actually imagine that downriver one might start to value that a little bit more.
Sure.
Which now allows the two to like transact a little bit more, and it gives them a shared incentive to maintain that positive externality, right?
Okay.
And so this is like a nice property to have. What you can also point out, though, which really is a problem, is this problem of wallet segregation. So imagine that somebody were to donate to a cause, get a whole bunch of this currency into their wallet, but instead of putting it into their normal wallet, they put it into a secondary wallet where it was just that currency, pure currency. And now they show up somewhere and they start to buy stuff at this incredibly discounted price, right? Well, that would drive down the valuation a ton. And so we find that when we create these models, it's required to, like the public goods entrepreneur has an incentive to mix up some of the currency that's normally transacted with in their community with that new currency that they're emitting. And so they emit it in a pre-mixed form. And that allows them to control against wallet segregation and against unfair arbitrage.
Sure. Okay. But how does that still not like over time just go to equilibrium where those two things just go to be the same value even in that case?
What are the two things?
Like if I have all my currencies are like I'm basically combining, like mixing it with other currencies that like, let's say they all stay the same and I have like different valuation for like one other currency. What's preventing them from over time just that one also going like within that balance? Otherwise, like wouldn't it still be uneven because everything else would be the same?
Why do two currencies that are two different currencies not?
So like if I'm mixing them, I might not be explaining this well, but like if I have like a basket of currencies that's all valued at the same value, and I'm mixing that with like some other currency that has a different value between two different towns, how does that not over time still? Because wouldn't my valuation like for that basket still be less than the other one? Like, how does that prevent arbitrage in that case?
Okay, so you say you have many currencies that you have a valuation that's equal for,
Yes.
and then one that's very high.
Yes.
And then what do the wallets look like?
Yeah, like how does that still prevent me from like engaging in arbitrage between those two baskets? of
No, you
currencies?
can. You can still engage in arbitrage between two different communities, for sure. And they would find an equilibrium between those communities.
Oh, okay, I see.
If, like, the only way they would retain some sort of non-equilibrium is if there's some prevailing preference for this. And so this is why, like, if you make the one argument that you can make is that this sort of bottom-up price discovery would converge to whatever the top-down price discovery is. In which case, this would just be the same as a normal Forex market. And if that's the case, then fine, right? We've done no harm. But if there's any difference, if giving people a little bit of an ability to like change their local valuation, such that local values, preferences, and beliefs can manifest on can manifest in prices, then that's really interesting because then like what's the dynamic that's actually driving that? What's the behavior that's driving that dynamic?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Let's give Connor a huge round of applause.